Even going back to Renee Good, the idea that there was an ICE agent that was filming while involved in this life or death, supposedly for him situation, right? You're claiming that, but at the same time, you're using your phone to document this.
I've never had a law enforcement agent pull up their assumedly personal smartphone and film me. I've never seen that. To have them just have a gun in one hand and a phone in the other blew my mind. I just have to wonder where is that content going? Where are those photos and videos going?
I'm Charlie Warzel. Welcome to Galaxy Brain. Around 2015, I started to do a lot of reporting on the ways that the internet was causing a societal rupture, right? It's possible, I think, that for Americans and maybe for everybody, that there's never been a true shared reality, that we have always been living in some respect in filter bubbles of our own making, even before the internet. But as the world really came online, and as our politics and our culture were uploaded to these social networks that are essentially built for viral advertising, that the shreds of our monoculture were consumed by a constellation of content, right? Much of it algorithmically fed to us. And that something changed in that moment. I wrote back in 2017 that it felt like that was the first year of the Trump presidency where it just became obvious that Americans were effectively living in two universes, and each one was propped up by their own information ecosystems. Around that time, too, I was also writing a lot about the ways that technology would continue to blur and make it harder to understand what was real and what wasn't real. In 2018, I wrote this piece where I spoke to a number of researchers, including a man named Aviv Ovadia, and he specifically warned of this infocalypse, is what he called it, an information apocalypse, basically a future where AI tools and craven, hyperpartisan actors on this algorithmic internet that's completely fragmented and fractured and tech-powered would allow anyone to cast aspersions on any event or anything or any fact. People could just fake anything, and they argued that would eventually create this realm where, to borrow a phrase from the researcher Peter Pomerantsev, nothing is true and everything is possible. People, they said, would be radicalized, they'd be overwhelmed, they'd be hopelessly divided, and they'd be sad. But mostly, it would get to this state where when you can't figure out what's true, when everything is just this information war, that eventually you just start to tune out, right? And this was all pre-pandemic. It felt very plausible, but the generative AI tools weren't out yet. They were pretty crude, they were pretty bad. So there was this feeling that it was plausible, but it still felt so futuristic. But today, it kind of feels like we're living in that future. Just in January, just this month, it feels to me, as someone who's covered this for a long time, that we are living in a pretty straightforward depiction of what the worst case post-truth information apocalypse scenario was of the people who were warning about it in the late 2010s. I mean, if you just think about this month, you have X and Grok and this major platform generating and distributing this AI non-consensual sexual abuse material and having it viralized and weaponized to intimidate and harass minors and women. You have a terminally online government, and you have the officials marshaling the resources of the military in service of propaganda to perform for this imagined audience online. And that's all happened with the US's military invasion and capture of Maduro and all the content that has been posted alongside it. You have a YouTuber named Nick Shirley, who at the end of last year posted this video online alleging daycare fraud in Minnesota involving the state's Somali population. That video exploded online and eventually led to a chain of events that led to the Trump administration deploying a higher level of enforcement of ICE en masse to the Twin Cities. This, of course, culminated in an increased amount of raids and ICE agents in the street in Minneapolis, and ultimately in the tragic confrontation where an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Good in her car. This, of course, was captured on video, and that video quickly spread online with people analyzing it from multiple angles. There have been tons of protests in the ensuing weeks. So much of that has been captured online. Protesters filming ICE agents filming protesters. Incredible amounts of content on social networks of people being abducted or arrested or having tear gas deployed on them. It is this situation where it feels like there's this battle being fought through everyone's phone. It feels a bit like a hinge point, and it feels like there is despite all of the political issues happening here, that there is a technological issue, that this is all a bit of a culmination of things that I've been following for a really long time. Somebody else who's been following that, in some cases alongside me, is Ryan Broderick. Ryan Broderick writes the Garbage Day newsletter and is the host of the Panic World podcast. Ryan and I worked together at BuzzFeed during the 2010s for quite a while, covering the ways that the internet changes how we behave politically and the way that it can impact some of these political movements. Ryan was someone who BuzzFeed sent to cover all kinds of online and offline protests around the world. He's been to 22 countries, reported from 6 continents, and he's been on the ground for close to a dozen referendums and elections. Ryan recently came back from observing all the protesting in Minneapolis, and he joins me today to talk about what happened in Minnesota, what is happening, and the ways in which all of this can be linked and not linked to an extremely online society. He joins me now. All right, Ryan Broderick, welcome to Galaxy Brain.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. Congrats on becoming a podcaster. I'm really sorry that happened to you.
I know. It's everything I ever wanted to just be mocked on YouTube and across multi-platforms. It's lovely.
That's right. It's about discovering new audiences that hate you. That's what modern life is.
That's what we're doing. Oh man. Well, I appreciate it. I want to talk to you about your reporting. You went to Minneapolis just a few days after a ICE agent killed Renee Good, and you were there for protests around the city and around the federal building. I want to start with just tell me what it was like to be on the ground in Minneapolis for those few days.
It's very surreal. I've definitely come back, with a profoundly different take on the seriousness, I would say, of the Trump administration. I think you and I have been having essentially one conversation for a decade, which is like, how seriously should we be taking this stuff? Is this just like internet chatter, or is this a real existential threat to American democracy? And now that I've kind of seen the whole hyper object, from internet content down to what is effectively like an occupation of an American city, I think we need to take it very seriously. I'm pretty freaked out.
Yeah. So give me a sense of, because you were kind of there in the beginning of this. I mean, things are still going on. There's still people protesting. There's, this is not like a finished movement in terms of the raids in the Twin Cities. But since you were there in the beginning, tell me how you saw it evolve in terms of, both the protesters and ICE's participation there.
Yeah. So we saw the news come across social that Renee Nicole Good had been killed in Minneapolis. And my producer, Grant, and I, we work on our show Panic World together. So we started talking to our partners on our podcast, which is Courier News. And I was like, look, I think this is big. We should do this. And so we went, basically we were there 24 hours after she was killed, and we spent the weekend there. And, if we had the money and the resources, I'd still be there. I think it is like still unfolding and developing. But the point of our trip was not, and I keep stressing this in everywhere I talk about this, like our point was not to like re-report what people in Minnesota are already covering. They have a great local news scene, but there are specific questions that I think people like you and I ask of events like this that local news doesn't have the bandwidth or even the interest in asking, and so it was really useful for me to just, follow the action for 4 or 5 days and see how this community is using technology, how they're responding to technology, how the internet is shaping the events on the ground. And I think we did that. But yeah, I think this is going to become just sort of like one of those like long political quagmires that like happens during Trump administrations. Like it's just going to drag out.
So give me a sense of the level of onlineness of these protests. Give me a sense of that how the tech is shaping it. I think for the first part of the question is a lot of modern protest movements are very online organized, via social networks and different apps and things like that. This one seems to be, based off of the reporting I saw, a little bit, you read that a little bit differently.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think back of like, what was the last protest I went to? And I went to a few during 2020, but like the last sort of movement like this that I saw up close was the Hong Kong democracy movement in 2019. And I was there for what would eventually be, I think no one knew at the time, but it was the last time they protest before China really cracked down. And that was totally online. Like I watched a completely silent crowd moving in perfect sort of organization using Telegram, which I really like freaky. Like these Gen Z kids had figured out like how to use these messaging apps in a way that I'd never seen before. Minnesota is not that. Like it is not like there's a hashtag and we're all like spray painting it around the city and we're wearing Guy Fawkes masks and shit. No, none of that. It is people who are, if they're using apps, they're using Signal. They're using a walkie-talkie app. I think there's a couple that they're using to organize like ICE monitoring. And they're finding out about protests and demonstrations by just going to them. We interviewed countless people who are like, yeah, like I was on my way back from work and I saw this and I'm mad. So I came by. Like, and we talked to people who've never been to a protest before in their lives. Like, we're talking like middle-aged people who are like, I don't have any real political thoughts and this is insane and I'm going to come out and I'm going to protest. So it was very different. And to compare that to the other side, which is like extremely online, was a total inversion of everything I've seen in my career. Like it really stopped me in my tracks.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that because something striking that I saw in your reporting, just like coming across on social media as you were like sharing in the moment.
You didn't read the post?
Oh, I always read the post.
No, you just read the Blue Sky
in the moment.
post. I see. I know. I get it. Yeah.
I mean, you think I'm going to pay for a subscription?
No, I wouldn't.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, of course.
Something that I saw though was you were videoing a couple of what seemed to be like content creators like stepping out of ICE vehicles, or at least government or unmarked government looking vehicles, filming and then like popping back and not addressing themselves. What did you see in terms of creators, influencers who were sort of either deployed by or administration adjacent or supported by the administration in some facet? So
the specific incident you're talking about with the guy who jumps out of the ICE vehicle, basically this woman gets arrested by ICE because she punches their window as they drive by, like didn't damage the window or whatever, if anyone cares. But like, they jump out of the cars, they pull up, and they just tackle her to the ground. And then right behind them, coming out of the same car, was a guy in plain clothes, like a nice suit, like sunglasses, and he's smiling and he's filming the whole thing. And I am screaming at him like, "Who are you? Like, why aren't you in uniform? Who are you with? Where's that video going?" I later find out that it's a Fox News correspondent that was on a ride along with ICE, but there was also just like a ton of other right-wing networks that are around. Like the Daily Wire was filming people, and OAN and News Nation and all the baddies. There were also a group of YouTubers, live streamers, content creators that were running around the city, like harassing people. And they had a much less official connection to ICE, but obviously like whenever they would rile up the crowd, the ICE agents would come out and protect them from the crowd. And that culminated in last weekend with the leader of that group, Jake Lang, a January 6th insurrectionist. He tried to burn a Quran on the steps of the Minneapolis state. He tried to burn a Quran on the steps of the Minneapolis City Hall and got his ass beat. And so it's that to me is like much more connected to what we've already seen in Trump administrations, like the roving gangs of content creators that are just like, trying to antagonize leftists and make them look violent on stream. But the fact that ICE was so brutal to the protesters and while also basically running defense for these content creators, they weren't trying to hide it in the way that, like, I think, police forces were in the 2020 protests.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you saw from ICE agents, because there is this element, and I want to get into it in a second, of this content creation spectacle. But in terms of, you saying you came back from this, and it's very obviously understandable why you would feel this way. Like, I'm freaked out about this and the seriousness of what's happening there and what the administration's doing. But can you just describe for me and for people, who may not be mainlining this stuff on their phones, like what you were seeing from ICE that was so disturbing, or the way that they were, treating protesters?
They don't even seem to understand like why they're trying to control the crowd. Like, they don't really, it's not like, I've dealt with, antagonistic police forces in protests before, and there's a rhythm to it. There's sort of like an assumption that, like, if you do this, they won't really hassle you. And we can get into the weeds of like how that breaks down as protests become more extreme, but like, there's like protocols. ICE does not have that. They don't really care. They will scream at you. They'll yell at you. They'll kind of break kayfabe. They are also filming you. They are like very intent on filming you with their cell phones and with telescopic lenses that they have guys like parked behind them in cars, like filming through the window.
And that feels very different, right? That's not something I've like, even going back to Renee Good, the idea that there was an ICE agent that was filming while involved in this, life or death, supposedly for him situation, right? You're claiming that, but at the same time, you're using your phone to document this. That feels very unique. That feels like a very different form of, enforcement tactics.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've never had a law enforcement agent pull up their assumedly personal smartphone and film me. Like, I've never seen that. And like, I mean, obviously, like, there are agencies that do surveillance on protest movements and it happens, but to have them just like have a gun in one hand and a phone in the other blew my mind. And I just have to wonder, like, where is that content going? Like, where are those photos and videos going? Yeah. And so like the fact that these guys are just taking photos of people and either uploading them to some kind of database or sharing them with each other, like, my mind sort of goes to, okay, then what? So
right,
these guys, let's say they have dozens of photos and videos of random people in Minneapolis on their phones. Like, are they sending them to each other being like, keep an eye out for this person and like beat their ass if you see them? Like, I don't know. We will eventually at some kind of trial, perhaps, find out like what these guys are doing, on back channel. But yeah, it sort of adds to the idea that these guys are like, I don't know, like content creators first and a Gestapo second or something. It very surreal, very dystopian.
And yeah, and the non-professionalization of all of it, right? There was a piece, I believe it was last week, could have been the week before, where a reporter applied for writing for Slate, applied to work for ICE, had a military background, but certainly was like somebody who had been hypercritical of the Trump administration and immigration policy, enforcement policies, and ICE in general, and still got hired. And the idea being like the threshold is so low. Did it add to the anxiety knowing that you're dealing with a sort of improvised force? Like, not only that the guys are out there filming, it seems like they want to be creating some content, but also just like this idea that, again, the the standards of training might be totally different. And like, did that add to the sense of unease in terms of the protesters and the people who were around?
Yeah, I mean, like, you can't really predict what they're going to do. I remember on like the Saturday we were there's this massive protest in Minneapolis, 1,000, 5,000 people, many of them immigrants, like many of them with immigrant rights groups and stuff. And, we're going through these little side streets in Minneapolis. And I just kept thinking, like, what is stopping Trump from saying on Truth Social, hey, like, get him? And Greg Bavino and everybody, like, cordoning off two sides of the street and just kettling everybody. Like, we've, that can happen. Like, the sort of the general unease of the whole thing is that, like, you're not dealing with a accountable, a rational, a identifiable law enforcement group. You're dealing with guys in masks that are filming you that don't really have any kind of protocol and don't really seem to care about anything other than quotas. Like, I read that they're supposed to be getting like 3,000 arrests a day. And the other thing is, like, when they do detain you, in a normal situation, a reporter gets detained at a protest, you might get thrown in jail for like a few hours, maybe the weekend. You might miss filing your story. And then, you go home. With the ICE detention facilities, like, they might just put you somewhere. And so if you're a reporter and you're trying to cover this, they've already made filming their activities a possible, crime. According to what is it, MPSM 7, if you film their activity, they can charge you with terrorism. They can charge you with obstruction. And there's really no oversight for what they're doing. So the risks are just a lot higher than any sort of protest movement I've ever seen. Yeah.
And I believe, what is it? Is it NSPM 7, right? National Security Presidential Memorandum 7.
NSPM 7, yeah.
Is basically an executive order that is meant to dismantle left-wing terrorism and basically allowing the government to qualify people as domestic terrorists or domestic terrorist organizations, which allows for different standard of prosecution. And yeah, so that adding to all that confusion and chaos. So you saw this, you wrote, we are all content for ICE. It's very clear that, the Department of Homeland Security has basically transformed immigration arrests into this visual propaganda online. It's very clear that there is a strategy here. There is a lot of pressure from the administration to have ICE, really active in terms of a media campaign. What purpose do you think it is serving them to do that?
I think everyone is trying to answer this question. And this might be a unfulfilling answer, but I think there's a couple things happening simultaneously. I think the Trump administration is full of like genuinely xenophobic ideologues that want blood and soil nationalism, and they love this stuff. I think that Trump is a creature of the media, and he sort of understands that everything has to have a media component to it. And we've seen that, like, I don't think that he's playing four-dimensional chess, but I think he understands that, like, everything he does has to have some kind of news cycle attached to it to feel like it matters for him.
Well, I'll just say on January 20th, which is Tuesday of this week, Donald Trump posts on Truth Social, like, we need more photos of people who were arresting in Minneapolis. We need more documentation of just how bad they are. Like, it's very clear that, well, he's not playing four-dimensional chess that we know of. He is, as you said, just like hyper aware of the idea that, like, this needs to be fed. People need to have this raw meat of, like, our nation is under siege in order to continue to support and to justify.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
And I think the last part of this is, I think it is safe to assume that the Trump administration is inside of their own filter bubble. I think this is happening across culture en masse. And I think based on the reports I've seen coming out of, like, sort of the inner circle, if you want to believe them, they were surprised that people were pissed about this. And I have to, I don't think Trump is actually particularly online. I've never thought that. I don't think he knows what a 4chan is, but I do think that he has surrounded himself with podcasters and posters and then I think that those people are super tapped into X. And so I do want, we haven't actually talked about this dimension of what's happening in Minneapolis yet, but I think it's important context. So ICE has been in the state for months. All of this ratchets up after the YouTube documentary by the right-wing influencer Nick Shirley. Nick Shirley's documentary alleges fraud at daycares in Minnesota. All of it had been reported before. It was even being investigated by the FBI already. We've known about this. But the right-wingers who had never heard of this because they don't read real newspapers and don't have accurate information pipelines were incensed. That to me points in the direction of that these people genuinely do not know things. And you can say it's by design. You could say it's because they're all stupid. You could say it's because they're addicted to the internet. It could be a combination of the three, but that does inform their behavior. And we've seen this all year that, all of last year, the administration is doing things because they see them online.
Right. And also I think too, there's the other side of this and you wrote about this. Can't believe this was also in January when the United States invaded Venezuela. But, the idea of a content first administration, but something you wrote, I'm going to quote you to yourself here, which is always fun. I know. You said, politics and political violence is now something performed first and foremost for an online audience. It almost doesn't matter what happens IRL if it makes noise online. And I think that, that it's not just to what you're saying, which is that there is this filter bubble. There's this idea that this is acceptable, right? Like their whatever Overton window or whatever you want to call it, that this is fine. We can do this. People won't be mad if we act in this particular way. But there's also the idea of that imagined audience that, maybe someone sees on X or some other place or whatever. But it's this idea of almost like one-upsmanship, right? It's like, okay, you do this video of what's happening in Minneapolis, supposedly, with daycares and Somalian refugees. And we're going to basically perform fan service, right? By sending a paramilitary force into that town. It seems like that level of the performance is really, really important here.
Yeah. So once again, for people who are not mainlining this stuff all day and they're sort of thinking okay, Trump 2, it's a little more in your face. It's got a fresh new attitude, but it's basically this. It's it's the same idea. And there's a core loop has changed. Trump 1, he wakes up in the morning, he watches Fox and Friends, he performs the day. He then finds out the next morning how Fox and Friends has digested what he's done, and he just keeps going, right? So everything's kind of performed for this TV channel that is then sort of synthesizing what he's doing and then influencing what he's doing. So the difference though between that loop and this one is that the internet is inherently a two-way street. So it's not just what was sort of downstream in the first administration, the internet lights up because Trump does something, because Trump saw it on TV, and then TV lights up, and then TV, the role of TV in that equation kind of organized things in a way. There was a rhythm there's a much more sort of reliable rhythm to it. This is way more chaotic because Nick Shirley, he's making a video based off of what he's already seeing on the internet. It then goes back into the internet, which then influences what's happening in reality, which then influences what's happening on the internet. And I was sort of trying to figure out okay, when did this new loop start in earnest? And I think I have it, which is the playbook, the test drive for all of this was Springfield, Ohio, and the conspiracy theory about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs in the park. Yeah. That whole thing though is a perfect illustration of what is now happening everywhere all at once. And it's happened. And I've even seen examples of it happening in Venezuela, happening in Greenland. It's this roving kind of internet content machine that just sort of lands where you live and then turns everything that's happening to you into this completely inexplicable content cycle that, for people on the ground makes no sense because it's not really meant for them. And it comes with conspiracy theories and viral videos and racist memes and AI imagery and paramilitary violence. Like, it's all kind of part of the same thing.
It's really interesting to think of it as like almost like a storm system that like develops outside, right? And just like comes to your comes to your town. I have had trouble trying to get a sense of who this is like helping, who this is hurting, right? Because on one hand, you have all of this documented evidence of like what is essentially a paramilitary force of people drawing guns, in public places, on people, deploying tear gas and pepper balls and all kinds of, chemical sprays on citizens, arresting people on whims, intimidating people, mocking them. And there's obviously, like, of course, the video of an ICE agent shooting a woman in broad daylight. And that all adds up, I think, in the eyes of people watching online or wherever. That is doing something, right, to people and how they view the country, their country. And then at the same time, these protests can also, as we're noting, give the administration a little bit of what it wants, right? It gives them content in order to depict these cities as war zones. Do you get a sense if this is like serving ISIS propaganda needs effectively right now? Or if this is in some ways just like information that is radicalizing people to get them to, wake up to the political reality in the United States? Where do you see that balance, or like where that's coming out at the moment?
That's like the $1 million question, I think. I mean,
right. That's all we ask here on Galaxy.
Yeah,
right? Is, the $1 million questions.
Yeah. Thank you for asking me the most complicated question of our time. I think there's a couple ways to think about it, and they are, again, this is always my cop out, but I do think in this case, like, if American monoculture ever did truly exist, like if we like to imagine it did, pre-Facebook, but like maybe it did. Maybe like the TV and movies made it feel like it existed, and we could all sort of believe in that. But let's assume things are different. I think there are vastly different realities happening simultaneously in America. So there are people who are just not going outside, and they are consuming all of this online, and they are being radicalized either for or against it. And that's like one camp. And then there are the people that it's happening to directly. The ones I talk to are just like the most average Americans you could possibly imagine. And they're like, this is insanity. And now I have to go to the federal building and blow whistles every day because these people won't leave me alone. And I've met those people, and they are just like the most normal people you can imagine. And they are incensed. They're furious. And then I think that there are a lot of Americans who just really do not believe that this could happen to them. And those realities like don't really line up anymore because we're not all looking at the same feed of information. We're not all looking at the same screen. And it adds to the chaos. It adds to the unpredictability of all this because, there might be, there are a lot of like non-white immigrant groypers that sit online all day talking about how they love Nick Fuentes and think the Holocaust didn't happen. What happens when ICE breaks down one of their doors, right? Like there are a lot of these keyboard warrior types who like do not imagine this could ever happen to their town, and if it does happen in their town, it's going to happen to the people who deserve it in their town. And yet, time and time again for the last year, we've seen stories come out being like, I didn't think they'd take the good immigrant in my town that I liked, and so there are. I don't think the average American really is prepared for the severity of what's of when it happens to them. And it is in, I think, the Trump administration's best interest to flood the zone with images of this stuff because it does make it feel abstract. The average person watches and cares until it no longer looks like it could happen to you. And I think that does serve Trump's interests. If Minneapolis looks like a completely unrecognizable war zone, that's great. It just means that the person watching goes, well, that doesn't look like my backyard, so like I should be fine.
And like, I was really struck in your guys's reporting for Panic World which came out in a video podcast form as well, which people should go watch, that, some of the people you interviewed were like, and this has been documented elsewhere as well, like the most Minnesota nice, like just sort of like, oh yeah, like I just came from, my shift at school or whatever. It's like when you see that and you feel that, there is this way of just being like, I think it brings the sort of like it's a great contrasted, image with the paramilitary force. It's like anyone who's like drawing guns on this person, like we've totally lost the plot, right? Like it's not that it's justified when it happens to people who don't, maybe look like you, but just this idea of it's a strong visual image for people who are watching at home is what I mean.
I think it's also like a self-perpetuating machine because, I forget who made this point. Maybe it was Wired, I think it was Wired last week. This week, they're all blending together. But they were basically like...
January.
Yeah. They were basically like, there's no reason for the Proud Boys to exist anymore because ICE exists. And so if you're running... I mean, Trumpism doesn't really have like an ideological center. But if you had to try to define it, you'd say like, okay, it's like grievance-based. And then if you open up a paramilitary force that requires, 47 days of training to join, and they're not even going to like check if you're a Slate reporter or not... Like you can just go and hurt other people. And so in a sense, it almost makes logical sense that this would be the next step for Trumpism, because you can't sustain that like othering of Americans long term without some way to like get people to sign up and do it. So it's almost like we have to create this paramilitary force and we have to start paying people to do this, because if we don't, like, that energy could dissipate, or they might just find out that like maybe we're not all so different after all.
This was something that I was thinking about in a different way, and it is a bit of a tangent, but I've, as you have, been writing about, MAGA influencers and stuff like screeching online about civil war since like 2017 or whatever, right? Like people who are just like, this is going to lead to some kind of, massive crack up type thing. And then so many people that I've talked to who are actually, experts in this type of stuff and in conflicts are like, part of the reason why terms like civil war are like so unhelpful is because it's incredibly difficult to imagine in certain places, especially a country as big as the United States, giving structure to a conflict like that, right? Like this idea that's like so much of it would just be like, weird infighting or acts of sort of almost seemingly random terrorism or whatnot, right? And the thing that I have found so interesting and scary about the way that the Trump administration is not only using ICE, but the way that they are marketing it, right? This idea of all of this propaganda that's very clearly aimed at like white nationalists, defend the homeland type of stuff. The reason why I find that so bracing in the moment is that it feels like, and this is sort of, I think, what you're saying, that it's giving structure to a conflict, right? It is just sort of like a repository for, if you feel this way about about your country being under attack or invasion, or you've been radicalized by some of these platforms to the point where, posting just isn't doing it for you anymore. Here's a place to go, right? Sign up. And it becomes less of, like, you can see if, in a sort of like speculative way, this becoming a repository for a very specific type of person and a force that actually does resemble what some of these militia-like organizations were, right? Except in this case, it has government funding and the, according to both J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller, like absolute immunity for your actions. And that feels like it is a completely different, or like a turn of the screw on this, concern about infighting in this country.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. If we take the reports at face value that morale is very bad inside of ICE, I do wonder how they deal with that. Like, like you, I'm always sort of saying like, okay, like what's next? Is this working? Is this not working? And if we say that, okay, those reports are correct. Like ICE agents are miserable. They join ICE. They're all revved up on white nationalist Facebook content. And then they hit the streets and everyone's like, get the fuck out of my city. Like, I hate you. I mean, I heard the heckling in Minneapolis and they found out a bunch of their names and they just kept chanting like, so-and-so quit your job. So-and-so quit your job. And like, these people are becoming pariahs. So that to me is like, oh, like that your filter bubble has like lied to you. You've joined this federal agency for like student loan forgiveness or whatever it is. And now you're in the middle of Minnesota in the middle of January and everyone's screaming that they hate you and spitting at you and stuff. You might quit. And that's like a hopeful version. And then there's like the scarier version, which is like, what does the Trump administration do with that? Because we are dealing with like lots and lots of people who are getting revved up on stuff they're seeing online, who maybe would have joined a militia and like LARPed Confederate soldiers in the backyard for the next 5 years. But now they're like out with guns and they're like trying to struggle with like the cognitive dissonance of the world online and the world in real life are not the same. You know, what does that do to a paramilitary force like ICE? Like what is the next step? And I assume you're right, which is like they just start dehumanizing us further and further with internet content.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're giving the hopeful version, I'm like, well, this just absolutely totally rhymes with everything that we have covered over the last, whatever decade on the internet, where it's like, yeah, there is this version in which everyone's sort of like, okay, that was a fever dream. Like, whoa, I like the cognitive dissonance hits, and you say, okay, yeah, man, I was just totally wrong. Like, this is awful. This is a terrible way to live. Or what tends to happen online, and again, doesn't always happen in the real world because there is more friction there, is this idea of doubling down, right? Well, why declare being wrong when I could just simply make up a reality or make up something? Right, exactly. I want to ask you to try to put some of this into some context, and I'm going to do the wonderful thing where I quote you again. But I went back and I read a story. We both used to work at BuzzFeed News. You wrote this back in late 2018. I think it was after Bolsonaro won in Brazil, and I believe that you were there on the ground. But I'm gonna read this, which is, you said, quote, "I have followed that dark revolution of internet culture ever since. I have had the privilege or deeply strange curse to chase the growth of global political warfare around the world. In the last 4 years, I've been to 22 countries, 6 continents, been on the ground for close to a dozen referendums and elections. I was in London for the UK's nervous breakdown over Brexit, in Barcelona for Catalonia's failed attempts at a secession from Spain, in Sweden as neo-Nazis tried to march on the country's largest book fair, and now I'm in Brazil. But this era of being surprised at what the internet can and will do to us is ending. The damage is done. I am trying to come to terms with the fact that I'll probably spend the rest of my career covering the consequences." I have a few questions here. And the first is, do you still feel like you can draw a straight line between all this that, was there and all that has come after, from COVID to George Floyd to January 6th to Trump 2 to Minneapolis now? Like, did you feel like there's a straight line here, or did it break off and shift in different directions?
With the benefit of hindsight, I think the attitude in 2018 to say this is all because of internet platforms is a little simplistic. And I think it's a little ahistorical. Looking at the whole picture, or at least the picture up to now, it seems clear that the sort of post-Cold War geopolitical order, this kind of like neoliberal end of history idea, was deeply alienating and frustrating for people. The concept that we are all kind of done and we're just going to get like incrementally better in progressive ways. Maybe we'll have like a Republican come in and kind of calm things down, and then we'll go back and forth. And that idea was extremely frustrating to people. And when social media appeared, it allowed people to communicate without arbiters for the first time. So you start to see things like the Ron Paul presidential campaign in 2008, which I've gone back to several times because I think it's such a fascinating sort of like prototype of everything since. Occupy Wall Street, Arab Spring, the very, very first Black Lives Matter stuff. And what I think you and I and other people doing this work, we're not really totally getting, because of the nature of the way we cover it, which is not a problem. It's just that like no one can see the whole picture, is that like the technology didn't really create pathways that weren't there. What it did was allow us to see them. And so, and it's why I said earlier in the episode that, I don't know if monoculture was as monolithic as we assume it was pre-internet. It could just be that we didn't know. And so I think there is a straight line from, let's say, the launch of message boards in the 90s to now, and Facebook and everything else along the way. But it's not like Facebook conjured up some kind of political environment that wasn't there. It's that like it gave people like Duterte, like Modi, like Bolsonaro, like Trump, like Le Pen, gotta catch them all these people, it gave them the ability to speak to an audience that was already alienated and already angry and already bored. And that dovetailed perfectly with the way internet technology has developed in that same time frame. So, now we're at a point where they are essentially the same thing. What is good for the internet is good for your populist far right movement. And yeah, I think that will sound right 5 more years from now. I think, yeah, I don't know.
Ryan, I thank you for your reporting on this, for being in the emotional pain cave, the internet brain damage Thunderdome with me for all these years, and thanks for all your insights on this, man.
Thank you.
That's it for us. Thank you again to my guest, Ryan Broderick. If you liked what you saw here today, new episodes of Galaxy Brain drop every Friday. And if you want to support this work, the work of myself and all of my colleagues at The Atlantic, you can do so and support the publication by subscribing at theatlantic.com/listener. That's theatlantic.com/listener. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the internet.